Okay, welcome everybody. Yes, that voice interrupted me. So welcome everybody. I will try to share my screen now. Matthew, could you give me an indication? What are you seeing now?
I see your presentation and then people on the side of it, but that's fine.
Okay, that's good. But is the sidebar blocking the view now?
Not at all.
Okay, because it's blocking my view. Well,
you can move the sidebar a little bit.
Yeah, you can drag it over.
Out of screen, kind of.
Yeah, okay. Just can't find my, wait. Well, if I just minimize this, now I won't be able to see if you fall asleep. Just Matthew will keep an eye on you. Okay. If you close your eyes, then you are forewarned. Okay. So, okay, let's do this. So, okay, the title kind of reveals what we're talking, what we're already kind of alluding to. So, I chose the title. This is kind of a provocative thing. Perhaps you shall let nothing that breathes remain alive. So that's a quote from, I think, Deuteronomy. So that was God's command to the Israelites when they were about to conquer the land of Canaan. So conquest of Canaan and the character of God is the topic. So just in general, what is the problem here? Some, and I would say actually many unbelievers object that Israel's conquest of Canaan, as it is described in the book of Joshua, and especially God's command to completely destroy the inhabitants of Canaan, is somehow at odds with the concept of a loving God. Now, this is just a general description of the objection, and I would just start immediately by noting that the mere disliking of the conquest as such is not an argument. So, because basically what the objector is saying reduces to claiming that, well, I don't like X, so therefore X cannot be true. But in fact, whether you like something or not does really not determine whether it's true or not, or even if it's like good or not. So I would start by asking the objector to formulate a specific objection first, not just a dislike. And before I go to these possible objections, let's go through some caricature objections. And this thing applies to like almost anything people pull out of the Bible. So basically, you can argue for almost any position imaginable by just taking one verse out of the context. And well, even Christians can be guilty of doing this, actually. So, but anyway, the unbelievers do it as well. And I would say that they frequently misunderstand what they're quoting. But this is just a caricature thing, of course, because if the objector is allowed to do this, then basically we would have the same right. Just consider the following examples. We could just as well reply that the fool has said in his heart, there is no God, from Psalm 14. Or if the objector goes that God is not fair, we can say, we can quote Ezekiel saying, yet you say, the way of the Lord is not fair. Hear now, O house of Israel, is it not my way which is fair, and your ways which are not fair? But of course, I'm not advising you to answer this way. Also, although it would actually, I think these verses are applicable to the present situation. But just remember that we should be defending our faith in meekness and fear, according to 1 Peter 3:15. So even if the objector is rude and whatever though. So it's not good that we kind of follow his example necessarily. But just in principle, we could just say, well, the Bible also says that your way is not fair. So how do we continue from that? Here's another caricature objection, that the God of the Old Testament is not the same God as the God of the New Testament. Well, this is just so kind of basic and so obviously false that you would think that this is not a very common objection. But if someone really claims this, then of course we claim that there's just one God and he does not change. And in fact, he cannot change, because that's one of the attributes of God, is immutability. So it just doesn't make any sense to say, well, God somehow changed when the old covenant turned into the new. We furthermore claim that this immutable God has revealed himself to mankind through prophets, apostles, and also through his son Jesus. And all the inspired writings just make this book we call the Bible and its special revelation. And some people might want to downplay the importance of the Old Testament. And well, we should of course claim that the Old Testament is absolutely essential for Christianity. And I will also put some emphasis on that in this presentation. But if someone really argues along these lines, it could be profitable to establish the worldview of theism first. So this would have to involve theistic arguments, whether cosmological or moral or whatever. But just try to establish theism first. And after that, then you could try to defend the unity of the biblical narrative, or just unity of the Bible, basically. And the last caricature objection would be this: God is love, therefore he could not have commanded the killing of the Canaanites. But note here that the conclusion simply does not follow logically. Because, for instance, God approved the crucifixion of an innocent man 2,000 years ago. And he allowed this, or actually even planned this, precisely because of his unfathomable love for the world. And on the other hand, the Canaanites were not innocent, as we will soon discover. So I don't think the whole argument it just doesn't follow. So if someone really just insists on this, I think it's essential to clarify who God is and who man is, and what is their proper or true relationship, and also the context of the conquest. And one thing you could also ask, like, what do you mean by love, and what things does love entail, and how does love somehow outrule judgment, for example? And finally, God is love is I think it's a typical liberal misrepresentation of God, because to say that God is love is of course true and perfectly accurate, but it is not true to say that God is only love. So God does have more than one attribute. So God is also just, okay? He's also, like I said, he's immutable, he's eternal, all-knowing, all-powerful, all that stuff. So you can't just say, well, God is love and just leave it at that. What people mean who say, well, God is love, and that view kind of reduces God to a God who actually allows everything and requires nothing. But that's actually so natural for us, because that is what the fallen man wants God to be like. Like C.S. Lewis says, that we don't really want a heavenly father who's going to discipline us. We want a heavenly grandfather who barely even knows what's going on and allows everything and all that kind of stuff. Okay, well, this is a list, and not exhaustive list. Here's 3 possible specific objections. So they could all start with the phrase, since the God of the Bible commanded the Israelites to exterminate the Canaanites, option number one, he is not all good. So this objection does not deny the existence of the God of the Bible, but it challenges his omnibenevolence, which means that he's all good. That's challenged. The option number two could be to argue that God does not exist, since God by definition is all good. So the objection number two denies the existence of the God of the Bible. And the option number three takes things a little bit further still and says no theistic God exists, since God by definition is all good, and all the major theistic world religions are based on the Old Testament. So I just made these up. I mean, I didn't take these from anywhere, it just popped into my head, and the list is not, exhaustive. There could be more than this. This is just for demonstration. And certainly it's true that all the major theistic world religions are based on the Old Testament. So Judaism is based on that, Christianity and Islam. But depending on the specific objection, several different kinds of answers may be required. And there are, in fact, several ways to respond. So you first need to ask, what is the specific objection? And after you heard that, you should try to think, okay, how to answer this. And some objections may be better answered with theistic proofs, these philosophical evidence for the existence of God, than with the approach that I'm about to take. My approach here is to examine the conquest as one part of the entire biblical narrative, which is mostly the historical unfolding of God's rescue plan for the world. And I did this for several reasons. One being that I can't just cover everything in one presentation. It's just, as you understand, just covering one theistic proof would take a lot of time. So this is my approach. And also, I think it's very important to start from the biblical text, because we believe that it's inspired. We believe that it's true. And so my hope is to demonstrate to the unbeliever that when properly understood in its context, the conquest actually reflects God's holiness, love, justice, and mercy, instead of raising suspicions about these attributes. And these are my reasons for using this approach. I just call it the narrative approach. The Bible is a unified book. So we should remember that the Old Testament is part of the Bible, okay? And the story tells us a coherent, unified story from Genesis to Revelation. So if someone argues from his, for example, atheistic viewpoint, and you just never touch what the Old Testament says or the book of Genesis says, I don't think the objection necessarily understands the proper context and the background of your Christian worldview. So I'll try to show that the conquest was a necessary link in fulfilling God's promises to Abraham, which then were necessary to have the Messiah to appear. And that was also obviously necessary to redeem the whole world. So therefore, it's necessary to examine the conquest not in isolation, but in relation to the whole biblical narrative. Now, since the whole biblical narrative is a very wide topic, we need to stay kind of in general. We're trying to take this bird's eye view of the landscape. So we cannot try not to get stuck at details necessarily. And one more thing is also that I think it is absolutely necessary to ground the whole narrative on the worldview foundation that is provided by the book of Genesis, and especially chapters 1, 2, and 3. I think that's really, really crucial. It's the only way that the critic will gain a proper understanding of God, man, and their relationship. And just a couple of remarks here. When I talk about narrative, and I talk about story, I don't mean to imply unhistoricity. So I assume that the Bible is historically accurate and that the conquest narrative is also historically accurate. But I'm not trying here to prove it. So it's not the purpose of this presentation. My aim here is to try to show that the narrative as a whole and the conquest as a part of it is internally consistent, meaning that it's not contradictory, so that the story is a coherent story. Okay, that was a kind of a long intro, but now we'll look at some of the things in Genesis 1, 2, and 3 that are important to understanding the general narrative. So we should emphasize that God is a creator. So he's sovereign over everything he has made. So he's sovereign over your life and he's sovereign over the unbeliever's life. And he alone is self-existent, necessary being, as we know. But man is also an important creature. Although he is a creature, he has been created in the image of God. So we're somehow similar to God. And I would say that we have been created to have fellowship with God and to glorify him. But then the very important point is that we were created good, but our first parents chose to rebel against God, and thus they became corrupt. They even became cursed, and they became separated from God. So our stance, I think, where does it say in the New Testament that we are by nature children of wrath? So it's just healthy to keep that in mind. Of course, we're not the children of wrath as Christians, but like all of us are that by default. So the fallen man stands condemned for God, and apart from a divine rescue operation, he's unfit for fellowship with God. So this is kind of where the book almost starts. Oh, this is actually Genesis 3, the fall. But nevertheless, God implicitly promised to fix the consequences of the fall, and he promised to do this through the seed of the woman. And the book of Genesis, as it progresses, reveals more and more about the seed of the woman, so where he comes from. And notice also the skin clothes God provided from Adam and Eve. I think this is a foreshadowing the sacrifice of the Levitical sacrificial system, which then again foreshadows Christ. So although our first parents messed everything and ruined everything, God also promised to fix things up. So this is like a very, very general overview of the biblical narrative, and I used those indentations to try to suggest that maybe there is this kind of a chiastic structure in it. So before the creation, there's just eternity, and then there's the creation, and almost immediately after that, the fall, but also the promise of restoration. And then almost all of the rest of the Bible is about the unfolding of God's plan of salvation in history. And that after that has been accomplished, there is the new creation, new heavens and new earth. And after that, we return to the eternity. So at least I see that this could be a chiastic kind of a structure, just like a good book, actually, but just true. And this is a more detailed view of the previous slide, and I hope that you did have a opportunity to read all that. I'm not going to read everything, but I'm just going to point out some things. So if you notice that there's both in the beginning and in the end, there are the red circles. So the book begins with God having direct fellowship with man, and the book ends with God having direct fellowship with man. That's why we have been made. And like I said, we're somewhere in the church age, obviously, and but we don't yet have direct fellowship with God. that will have to wait until our resurrection and glorification. But maybe the point of the slide is in the middle, that God chose this messianic king who would come from Israel to be his instrument to achieve this redeeming act, so that we can have the direct fellowship with man. And before that can happen, many other things must happen also. So they are like links in a chain. So if one link is broken, the whole chain is useless. So before the Messianic king can arise from Israel, certain other things must happen. Well, the nation of Israel must be established first. So that, I think, began with the covenant with Abraham. And then, of course, as you remember, the nation of Israel grew large in Egypt, but they were in bondage. Okay, so God rescued them from the bondage and formed an official covenant with them, a covenant that did not annul the covenant made with Abraham, because that was made, that was an unconditional covenant. So meaning that the Israelites' behavior had nothing to do with whether the promises would be fulfilled. But the Mosaic covenant would be conditional. So there would be these blessings and curses depending on the faithfulness of the Israelites. And after the covenant, well, there's the 40 years of wilderness wanderings first, but then comes the conquest of Canaan. So unless Israel settles in the promised land, the Messiah cannot appear. And also the Davidic covenant, which is basically God is promising of the Messianic king that he would forever sit on this throne of Israel, is obviously important. And we will not go through the rest. That was just for your entertainment. But the point is that the conquest and settling in the promised land was not just a random event in the history of Israel. It was absolutely necessary for these other things to come, and finally that the Messiah could come. Because unless he redeems us, then we're just doomed. I mean, that's the way it is. The Abrahamic covenant is referred to here, and God said to Abraham, "In you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." And if you read the Pentateuch, which means the first 5 books of Moses, or the first 5 books of the Bible, the books of Moses, God's promise of offspring to Abraham is a major theme. And why does that matter? Well, because Abraham is part of the godly line leading to the Messiah, who we now know is the seed of the woman. And the Apostle Paul says this explicitly in letter to the Galatians, that Christ is the seed. Well, of course, the seed goes through Adam, Seth, Noah, Shem, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Judah, David, and Jesus, like in an abbreviated form. And another promise was the promise of land, like I already mentioned, that to your descendants I will give this land. So unless Israel has actually people in it, and unless Israel has land, well, unless Israel has those two things, Israel is not a nation, and if it's not a nation, we cannot get the Messiah. So the Abrahamic covenant is a necessary link in the chain leading to the Messiah. And by the way, please note that these promises of the seed and the land, again, they are unconditional, and they were given by faith. Genesis 15:6, I believe, says that Abraham believed God, and God accredited to him as righteousness. So those promises were not given because of any merit, but by grace. So this whole settling in the land, including the conquest, is something good for us that we are given by grace. And So the land of Canaan was given to Israel because of God's faithfulness. Faithfulness in that he promised Abraham certain things, and he will also fulfill those promises. And another reason was that the Canaanites were wicked. And this verse from Deuteronomy 9 says that it is not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart that you go in to possess their land, but because of the wickedness of these nations, that the Lord your God drives them out from before you, and that he may fulfill the word which the Lord swore to your fathers. So I think this is actually kind of neat because God combines something that could be seen as a difficult thing because there are already people in the land. So how can he drive them out without being unjust to anyone, but also fulfill his promise to Abraham and Isaac and Jacob? But he could do it because the inhabitants became wicked enough. Okay, but then someone could say, well, why was it necessary to just command to destroy them completely? So someone could say, well, I can understand that they had to leave, but why did they have to be destroyed? So here's one passage from Deuteronomy. When the Lord your God delivers them, the nations that inhabit Canaan, over to you, you shall conquer them and utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them. So, and at this point, I could mention that some people believe that these commands to utterly destroy and similar things are not meant to be like entirely literal, perhaps, but perhaps in rhetoric in some way, that just like conquer them, but that's what actually is meant, not necessarily like killing like everybody. So, but for the sake of argument and for the sake of this presentation, I'm going to assume that this is what has been literally meant, that they should spare no one. And I think what the text taken at face value actually says. Continuing, there's another example from Deuteronomy 20, and this is from my title also. But of the cities of these peoples, which the Lord your God gives you as an inheritance, you shall let nothing that breathes remain alive, but you shall utterly destroy them. And there's the list of the peoples. Just as the Lord your God has commanded you. So anyway, here is reason number one. So answer to the question, why was it necessary to exterminate them? Reason number one, and this is all from scripture. This is not my own opinions, but this is also from Deuteronomy. So that the Canaanites would not be a snare to Israel. So Deuteronomy 20:18, lest they teach you to do according to all their abominations, which they have done to their gods, and you sin against the Lord your God. Or Deuteronomy 12:31, you shall not worship the Lord your God in that way, meaning in their way, for every abomination to the Lord, which he hates, they have done to their gods. For they burn even their sons and daughters in fire to their gods. So God is certainly concerned that if the Canaanites are allowed to live, Israelites will learn their wicked ways, especially idolatry. And in fact, Israel did struggle with idolatry from Sinai to Babylon. So do you remember when Israel gathered to Mount Sinai? Moses went up to receive the law, and it took him some time, 40 days. The people down were asking Aaron to make them a god or gods, depending on the translation. So come, make us a god, because we don't know what happened to this fellow Moses. So make us God who will lead us on. And they made this golden calf. Immediately after receiving the 10 commandments, which say that don't make an idol. So God knew Israel well. He knew their weaknesses. And he knew that they would fall into that sin really quickly. And what was that important? Well, they just made the covenant at Sinai. So, but remember, the covenant was conditional. So if Israel would not be faithful, then there would be severe consequences. And this distancing of God from the nation of Israel, and that would mean that it would probably be impossible for a while the Messiah to come. So following false gods would break this fellowship that Israel had with Yahweh, and that would abort God's plan of salvation, or at least delay it. So another quote from Deuteronomy says, regarding to or relating to this, then it shall be, if you by any means forget the Lord your God and follow other gods and serve them and worship them, I testify against you this day that you shall surely perish. As the nations which the Lord destroys before you, so you shall perish. But see, it wasn't the plan of God to establish the nation of Israel so that it would perish. But it was the aim of God to establish the nation of Israel so that the Messiah could appear and redeem the world. But this would be impossible if Israel just immediately declined and became idolaters and evil like the Canaanites. Reason number two, their iniquity, meaning the iniquity of the Canaanites, was complete. So there was a certain measure that was fulfilled. And this is referred to in Genesis 15. This is from, God made certain promises to Abraham. And God said to Abram at that point, know certainly that your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, meaning Egypt, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. And also the nation whom they serve I will judge, like he did in the Exodus. Afterward they shall come out with great possessions. Okay, but in the fourth generation, they shall return here for, now this is the point, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. So this seems to suggest that God couldn't bring the Israel to the promised land before the iniquity of the Amorites was complete. And I'm thinking that maybe that's because God is also perfectly just. So he will await for the sin amount to reach the limit after which he can no longer be graceful, but he just has to judge these people. But note that this means that God endured the wicked behavior of the Amorites for 400 years. So I'm just pointing out that let no one say that he was not merciful and long-suffering with the Canaanites. Something happened, my screen froze. Matthew, you can hear me. Can you give me a message? Oh, okay, so you can hear me. Do you still see the same slide?
Yeah, it's still on reason 2.
Okay, let's see. I'm trying to do something. No, the arrows won't work. I'm unable to.
Stuck?
Oh, okay, something. Okay,
it's different now.
Okay, so the mouse works. Okay, that's good enough. But this is going the wrong way. Okay, I think we're here. Yeah, okay. Anyway, Matthew, is everyone awake?
Well, their pictures are off, so I'm not sure.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
we're
Keep
here.
going. Think we're fine.
We are here.
Okay, very good. Because it's so silent, and I don't know if I'm talking to an empty screen or whatever. Okay, very good. So reason number 2, their iniquity was complete. Yeah, this continues from the previous slide. So in addition to the gross abominable idolatry, we just saw, even burning their children in fire to their so-called gods, the Canaanites were also occultists. They were in contact with demons. So Deuteronomy 18 is a great chapter to remember, because that lists every occult practice, basically, that people still do. I mean, the occult is on the rise. I think it's becoming more popular again. And so just look at the list. But anyway, it begins with these words: when you come into the land which the Lord your God is giving you, you shall not learn to follow the abominations of those nations. And then there's the list. There shall not be found among you anyone who makes his son or his daughter pass through the fire, practices witchcraft, or is a soothsayer, or one who interprets omens, or a sorcerer, or one who conjures spells, or medium, or spiritist, or one who calls up the dead. Okay, so these are all called things, and if someone does that, they're basically in contact with the demonic world. For all who do these things are an abomination to the Lord. And because of these abominations, the Lord your God drives them out before you. Okay, so that's the reason number 2. Okay, and suddenly this seems to work again. Okay, was this really the next slide? Yes. So, okay, I've given 2 reasons why the Canaanites had to be driven out and even destroyed. And this is just kind of a justification for that. Okay, in the Genesis slide, we remember that God is absolutely sovereign because this is his creation, okay? But we also read from several places, and this is just for an example, this is from Daniel 4, but there are other places, that God establishes earthly kingdoms and rules over them in truth and in justice. So if you remember in, I think it's in Luke's gospel, when Jesus was tempted in the wilderness and the devil said to him that I will give you all these kingdoms because they have been given to me. So just, he was lying, okay? So God is the one who establishes earthly kingdoms and he rules over them. Like the second passage says, the Most High rules in the kingdom of men and gives it to whomever he chooses. Okay, so he's the one who's in charge from generation to generation. And not just that, but Nebuchadnezzar said that the king of heaven, which is an interesting name for God only in the book of Daniel, mostly, all of whose works are truth and his ways justice. So if God is the one who is in charge and his ways are truth, and works are truth and ways justice, then it can only be an illusion that we think that something is wrong when he establishes kingdoms or just whatever with them. So this is just a biblical fact that God may bring sudden judgment on a wicked city or kingdom. And there are several examples. From the Old Testament, there's the classic Sodom and Gomorrah. And of course, the Exodus from Egypt, which was not only rescue of Israel, but also judgment of Egypt. There is the destroying of Nineveh, the Assyrian capital. That was prophesied by Nahum, and that was affected by the Babylonians in 612 BC. And please note, Jerusalem was destroyed twice. So God does not show partiality. So Jerusalem was destroyed twice by the Babylonians, and when they went to the exile, and of course by the Romans in AD 70. And of course, there's the global judgment of Noah's flood. and also the future tribulation period, which is going to be well, it's going to be global as well. And I'm just, like I mentioned, there are some views that perhaps the command to kill everyone was not actually literal, but I'm just going to bite the bullet here and just take that stance and take the hard way, and to just assume that this judgment will in fact affect everyone, men and women, young and old, adults and children. And of course that gives me, or gave me, some pause, but then it just occurred to me that instead of complaining, well, why does God kill these innocent children? And of course we know that children might be better off at the last judgment than evil adults. Okay, so I believe there's this age of accountability in the Bible. So if someone's very young, he or she is not going to face hell, I believe. And anyway, so I was thinking to believe that maybe we should consider the gravity of our sin instead of just blaming God for this. Because if my sin is capable of triggering this kind of judgment, well, maybe I should look in the mirror, right? And that gives a very good kind of bridge also to the topic of the holiness of God, which we're not going to address today more than this. But anyway, that there is this very, very great difference between the fallen man and the holy God. So this is where I ended up. And the Apostle Paul also writes that these judgments, and he's referring to judgment that Israel received during the wilderness wanderings, he said that these things happened to them as examples. So they were bad examples. We should learn from those things and not grumble. So this is kind of the, okay, these are hard topics, but I'm really reluctant to blame God for anything. So I just believe that the severity of sin is what is the point here. So we will finally come to the conquest itself, and this is just some brief examples now. So conquest of Jericho. The text says that everybody, except the prostitute Rahab and her family, was doomed to destruction. And well, that the passage simply says the same thing. The city shall be doomed by the Lord to destruction. It and all who are in it. All, I mean, that means all. I just believe that this is so straightforward. All must mean all. So whatever the age and what, young or old, whatever. So the only exception is mentioned by the text, Rahab the harlot and her family. And then there's the conquest of A, and the whole kind of summary of the southern campaign is the one below. According to the upper text, Joshua did not draw back his hand until he had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of A. And the second one, Joshua left none remaining, but utterly destroyed all that breathed, as the Lord God of Israel had commanded. Now, as I said, I believe this conquest was, for Israel, this was the fulfillment of God's promise to Abraham. But for the Canaanites, this was a divine judgment. So this one event kind of combined those two things. And I think it's important to understand that when we speak about God's nature or his attributes, and there are several, so God's justice and love demands that every sin must be punished in full. I'm just giving that to you. I'm not trying to defend it, but that's just a claim. And God's grace and love also, however, allows a delay in the punishment. But we should note that the delay is not sloppiness, but grace. And the punishment is not arbitrariness, but justice. So what I mean is that we should not take this delay for granted or as an indication that God doesn't really care or that he's arbitrary when he decides to punish or act. If God was only just, he would punish every sin immediately and in full, and we could not live here for a second. So delayed punishment is grace, and because it's grace, we should never take it for granted. But the point why God allows this delay to take place is that people could come to repentance. Like Peter said, the Apostle Peter, the Lord is not slack. Well, the context here is the second coming of Christ, but it could be used here, I suppose. The Lord is long-suffering toward us, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. So I think this is the last slide. By the way, I just noticed now there's some things in the chat. I haven't seen any text, so if there's something I will address after this. So in summary, humans were created to glorify God and to have fellowship with him, but the fall broke this fellowship. Of course, you know all this, but I think this is absolutely essential that you inform the unbeliever that this is what the Bible claims, okay? Because the unbeliever is trying to object a part of the Bible, and I believe that unless he understands in totality what's going on, he doesn't understand the context. So the biblical narrative revolves around God's plan of fixing the separation between man and himself. Okay, and I'm sure you know this as well. God chose Messianic King of Israel to reconcile fallen mankind to himself. And the Abrahamic covenant was a necessary step toward the Messiah. So it's not the case that Jesus just popped in from somewhere and said, well, I'm the Messiah. Well, if you just read, for example, the first chapter of Matthew's Gospel, you can find the genealogy of Christ. Well, it's given precisely to show the Jewish and other readers that this man, Jesus of Nazareth, is the promised seed. So, okay, so we have to understand this context. And for this to happen, Israel was to settle in the land of Canaan. And finally, the two reasons for why the Canaanites need to be destroyed and not just driven away was their wickedness. So this was a divine judgment. Just compare it to Sodom and Gomorrah, for example. And so that they would not lead Israel astray from serving Yahweh, thus preventing the appearance of the Messiah. So instead of the Canaanites being these innocent victims of an arbitrary God, they actually received a just and a very generously delayed punishment. So I believe this was the last one. Yes. So are there any questions or comments? I'm going to stop the screen share. Matthew, you can wake people up now.
Yeah, you can turn on your videos if you like, or leave them off, up to you. But yeah, any questions or comments are totally welcome.
Oh, there's some awakening. Cool. I'm just looking at the chat.
Yeah, so Yorki mentioned Paul Copen's video, Is God a Moral Monster? Well, he also wrote a book called Is God a Moral Monster? That's probably the best popular introduction to this topic that I know of. It's actually the only popular introduction to the topic I'm aware of, but
right. But you also said that you found some other stuff. So is some of that?
Yeah, I'll actually place that in the chat while you're answering questions. It looks like Iris has something to say.
Yeah, thanks for the really good presentation, Riku. I
Thank
have
you.
like a question that is a little bit linked to this. not directly, but I heard a claim recently that God in the Old Testament commanded child sacrifice, and I just was able to reply that, in my opinion, that is not the case. I didn't then have like any kind of verses to refer to that. That while there was this like kind of giving the firstborn son to God, like it didn't mean killing the child, but it was like, wasn't there something like that they could give something else instead? Like,
So,
do you remember that in more detail? Like,
so was he referring to sacrifice of Isaac?
also, and then that is also well, Isaac was not then killed, but like at the end, but then also was saying that there is this commandment in the like Old Testament. I mean, I remember that there is this, that you should, I don't remember what is the word in English, but you should kind of give the firstborn son to
Oh, yeah, okay.
God, but I mean, I don't think that the text says that that child needs to be slaughtered.
No.
But yeah.
Yeah, now I know what you're talking about. I mean, some English translations are a little bit obscure, but I think that the point is that you should consecrate the firstborn male to God.
Yeah,
And
consecrate, yeah.
yeah, or something like that. So you would and I think it just says in the text, I can check it later, but I think it says that if the consecration means that you pay some money or sacrifice some animal to consecrate your firstborn male son to God.
Oh yeah,
For
that's
God.
not what I remember as well. I think there was like, yeah, you could pay some money or then like sacrifice an animal, but I definitely do not think like in the Bible God has commanded
I mean,
killing children.
it doesn't make any sense, because like one of those passages that was in my presentation, the God was very displeased. He said, even of the habits of the Canaanites, he said they even sacrificed their sons and daughters in the fire to their God. Well, of course, someone could say, well, they just didn't sacrifice to the right God, but I just don't believe that's the case. I mean, I think it's just a ridiculous claim, really. And so you could just point it out. Maybe it's in Leviticus or somewhere else where it talks about the consecration of the firstborn male child.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the thing. Yeah, I will just try to find the exact verses and then I can refer to them and kind of point it out that it's not about killing children.
No, it's definitely not about that. Yeah,
Yeah, thanks.
no problem.
Then there's this one passage, I don't remember which book from the Old Testament it is, but it's about when this father figure like says that the next person that will come out of the gate, I will offer
Yeah,
like as a sin offering. And then is it in the book of Judges maybe?
Yeah.
And then it
Yeah.
seems that she's killed, and some atheists use this passage as a way of showing that God commanded like human sacrifice.
Yeah.
And then have you something to say about that?
Yeah, I mean, many people think that it's not about sacrificing the daughter. It's in the book of Judges. I don't remember which judge said that if God will give me this victory, then I will, whatever comes through the door when I go home, then I will give that to God. But I didn't think there are good reasons to believe that that's not a sacrifice in the sense that he actually killed his own daughter. There's one potential answer is that he consecrated his only daughter to God in the sense that she could not marry or produce any offspring, because the text, I believe it says that she was the only child. So if this man didn't have any more offspring, then his house would not continue. If it was the case that the daughter would never have any babies. So and otherwise it would, the text also said that she went with her friends to mourn for the fact that she never married. So I don't know, that's just my, and it would also be against the because I don't think God would kind of say yes to that offer, because he's clearly against human sacrifice. So it kind of brings us to also the third thing, is that people in the Bible do not always do according to God's will, okay? But that doesn't mean, just like, for example, what David did with Bathsheba and all the kind of stuff. So it's not that, okay, the Bible condones this kind of stuff. It doesn't mean that. So we also need to be careful if someone points out that, look, here's happening X, Y, and Z. Well, it doesn't necessarily mean that the Bible endorses that behavior or whatever. So this is, Matthew, have you encountered that? Who was the judge? Do you remember?
I don't remember the name, but one thing I had heard about the book of Judges is that the judges are getting progressively worse and worse.
Yeah.
So they're shown like as not like, oh, really good examples to follow. I think the point of that text is showing like, look, this guy's a fool, like for what he did in the first place. It's not saying like, oh, this is like supposed to be practiced and he did something righteous by offering to slaughter, his daughter.
Exactly. Yeah, it was a very rash decision.
Yeah, I've heard these like similar arguments that, I mean, God, in the text, God did not ask for that. It was his choice to do that, or his thing. And if you read the context, as Matthew said, of the whole book of Judges, I mean, it shows kind of the spiraling to kind of they are not shown as very moral people, or like it's shown as kind of the corruptness of people. So it can just be interpreted also that he just did a stupid thing.
Yeah, exactly. Alasar, you found the passage. Could someone read that, so we could at least
I'll
know the name?
try to pull it up and I'll post it in the chat.
Sure.
Hi. So actually, my question is kind of unorthodox. Mostly, like, if we have seen the Canaanites, they were kind of against God for almost 400 years, and one of the things they were doing was sacrificing kids, right? Because there is I don't remember what someone was teaching, that they used to make this loud noise so that the mothers don't hear the voice of their kids being sacrificed. And one of the questions I have been having was, why was God silent for 400 years? Like when they were sacrificing the kids, like that's the question I have.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it could even turn the whole thing upside down. We could ask the objector that, look, I mean, it was the opposite that you claimed, that they were not innocent at all. I mean, it's amazing that God endured this behavior for 400 years. So, but in general, of course, the fact that our good deeds and our bad deeds are not rewarded or punished immediately, I think it's necessary, because if our bad deeds are immediately punished, we wouldn't be here. And if our good deeds were immediately rewarded, then I think we would just do good for the sake of the reward and not for the sake of the good. So that's what I believe, actually. So but why was it 400 years? It's a very good question. It's an awfully long time. Also, in my opinion.
Yeah.
That's a really good question, but you can also think of like, why does God allow the wickedness to be ongoing today? Or even why does he allow my wickedness to be ongoing? So that is also the God's great mercifulness.
Exactly.
I was curious, Rico, you mentioned an age of accountability. Do you want to like sort of expand on that a little bit, what you mean by it?
Yeah, I mean, in case someone is not familiar with the term age of accountability. So I believe that the Bible, at least implicitly, teaches that there is a certain age, or maybe not necessarily just age, because some people are not mentally capable of ever making a decision to believe or reject Christ, for example. So even if they're like 100 years old. But anyway, if you're talking about normal people with normal intelligence, I would say that there's a certain age, if they die under that age, this is just my view, that they will automatically go to heaven. So they're not accountable for their personal sin before that age. But I'm not going to say any age here because I have no idea what that age is exactly. But I just hold that small children, young people are automatically saved. But if when they become adults and they knowingly reject the gospel, for example, or they don't even have to hear the gospel to be condemned, of course. I mean, I think Romans 1 is perfect, or the whole letter to Romans, I think, proves that we are condemned. I mean, every one of us is condemned at some point, apart from small children and those who just can't believe.
Different denominations have different interpretations on that as well.
Sure, I said this was just my view.
I think there's quite a few people who hold that view. I mean, I hold to that as well. I think that there's good biblical evidence for it, but maybe it's not strong enough to like be a good way to try and justify, you know, the conquest if you hold to the literal command to kill every man, woman, and child like you do. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I mean, there are implications if that thing is true, then just I would maybe ask you to consider a couple of examples. So for example, in the West, it's pretty common to do abortions, but at the same time, people are not widely saved. So instead of they're bringing their children into this world, where they also probably will not accept the gospel, they will abort them. But if this view is true, then they will go to heaven. And in a similar way, the Canaanites were not very godly people, but at least their kids would be saved. Because we have to remember that the aspect of afterlife also, the last judgment, the afterlife. So it's not that everything is just that nothing is important apart what happens in this world. So if people just say, well, all those kids were slaughtered, innocent kids, well, yeah, but you have to consider what happened to them and their parents. So because our staying here is just this mist that will evaporate tomorrow. So and after that is eternity. So we have to take that into account as well.
Matthias asked for biblical evidence for children being saved. I think, isn't it in Samuel when David, his child, dies? Doesn't he say something like referring to maybe seeing his child again?
Yes. Yeah. David says, well, I will go to him, but he will not come to me.
I'm thinking of, there's also the reference where Jesus says that like of these children that their angels always see my face in heaven or something like that. That's used sometimes, I think, as well. I don't know of anything else. Do you?
Well, yeah, in the same context, Jesus said that the kingdom of God belongs to the ones such as these, referring to children. So maybe you could think that he believes that children, and unless you become small children, you will not enter the kingdom of God. Those kind of stuff. So of course that could be interpreted in many ways, but that we should be childlike in our trust and all that kind of stuff. But I do believe that small children will go to heaven anyway.
I like the Bible verse in Deuteronomy, which said that there should be none among you who would do those detestable things like sacrificing their children, or what else there were. I think there was sorcery, because my cousin is involved with calling out dead spirits, or those kind of between the earth and the heaven. And yeah, well, she's calling them out in a group, and they try to bring them or guide them to God. And I was like, and because she talked about God, and I was like, do you have a calling from God to do this? And do you find any evidence in the Bible that you should do this? And it was obvious that she doesn't really read the Bible anyway.
Yeah.
So I was like, good reminder of that, because I want to send that to her. I mean, I mentioned about that back then,
Yeah.
but the interesting point was also like, it said, not there should be not even one among you who should do that. It's really like I don't know what would it mean if there was one. Is there like a great wrath of God upon the whole people of Israel or something? But it was really like kind of harsh, like not even one.
Yeah, it was really strict. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
But I guess that's also about the holiness of God, like, not even one, it's like the yeast that,
well, like one of the purposes of the Mosaic covenant, I think, believe that the God somehow tried to reestablish his presence or come closer to man. But then, like he said to Moses, that you need to take your sandals off because this is holy ground. So it's not permissible to do, be involved with demonic spirits if you're on the holy ground. It's just totally not an option at all. So we have to understand the holiness of God. It's a very good theme with this discussion, really. And that's why the Mosaic laws were so strict, I believe, because it's not so strict with us. I mean, like, for example, in Finland in general, I mean, God doesn't get mad so easily. Maybe that's one of the reasons why he allowed that stuff to continue for 400 years, because he was not there in the way he was in Israel.
That's one thing that comes up pretty often, even in some like liberal Christian circles, about like this conquest stuff and the strict Mosaic law, and then the idea of like when you started, you talk about God being like immutable and never changing, but then we have like this teaching in by Jesus, like regarding marriage, that Moses like allowed this like not so optimal marriage laws that were like in a sense immoral during the like Mosaic covenant. And if like when Jesus declared that only adultery is a permissible reason for divorce, like before Jesus there were like more permissible reasons for that. So people would say that like some of these, that God allowed like different things before that were in a sense immoral, but in some context it was like permissible, and that so on and so forth, but that they don't like necessarily are like they're justifiable for some like different contextual reason, and not So that's something that's like pretty interesting to me, and it's pretty commonplace to hear that. And I will go as far to say that like the Testament God is not the like, it's hard to fathom for some people because of like these things that it changed in a way.
Yeah. I mean, just like you said yourself, it wasn't that that the divorce is good in God's eyes, but he just allowed it. I mean, I take it to mean grace, that he, okay, I tolerate this because you're unable to do this otherwise. And I would maybe also, if someone says it's so different in the Old Testament, well, it's different because it's the Mosaic covenant. Okay, so but we are now in a new covenant. Of course it's different, it's a different covenant. And that covenant was for Israel, and was and is for Israel. And but we're not living in the Mosaic covenant right now. And that's one of the reasons kind of it bothers me when people just take these things in isolation and say, well, yeah, it's just so weird, God commanded to do this or that, and he's a different God. Well, we have to understand the whole context. That's why I tried to, I don't know if this was successful at all, but I tried to embrace this whole narrative just from a bird's eye view, to get the kind of the landscape features, so we can better understand things like conquest. It's sometimes difficult for even us to understand why he allows such things, or doesn't allow, or do this or doesn't do this. But it's especially difficult for someone who has barely opened the Bible in his life. So I think it could be helpful to bring out the narrative maybe first, and then just, okay, these are the things you have to acknowledge first, and then let's speak about the conquest or the Mosaic law or whatever.
Anyone have any other questions or comments?
Have you read or some of you, the Paul Copan's book, the Is God a Moral Monster, and would you recommend that?
Yeah, I've read it. I would definitely recommend it. Yeah,
Okay.
it's very well done. And I think he has another book coming out next month as well on the same topic.
Ah,
Yeah.
interesting. Okay, have to check that out.
Yeah, one thing I thought maybe would be good to emphasize was like, so Riku, you mentioned this, that when someone is objecting, making this objection that God is like somehow not good because he commanded this, genocide, you have the whole Christian worldview at your disposal when somebody makes that objection. You don't have to say that, I have to historically prove that all of these texts are reliable, right? You're saying that I can use whatever resources the Christian worldview has to defend against that view, right? That's what you were talking about.
Yeah, I mean, and just one of my kind of points or reasons behind this approach was that if the objector is going to take the Bible and try to use that against us, then we have a full right to take the Bible and defend it from within. And like I said, my goal was not to argue for the trustworthiness of the text. I just take it for granted here, and I take the historicity of the text for granted. I'm just taking it as a text and try to demonstrate that it is internally consistent, that it's totally consistent for God to do this. And the reasons I hope became more clear when we went through the narrative, that the conquest was not just, they were not just, it was not an isolated event, but it's absolutely necessary for us to have Christ so that we can be saved. And that, if anything, that shows God's grace and love and mercy and holiness, he is willing to come down here and die for us. So it's part of that, and not just something that you can detach from the salvific plan. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that was my approach. I deliberately didn't quote anything else than the Bible. So it's a different thing if someone asks, okay, well, let's suppose the text says this, but what reasons do I have to trust the text? Well, that's a different topic. I just took it for granted that the text is accurate. So, I mean, but of course we don't have to, limit ourselves to the Bible, but that's where I would start.
Yeah, I think the point is that if somebody brings up this objection, they're saying that that's internally inconsistent with a view of God as being loving.
Yeah.
So you're not, if they try to say, well, okay, well, how do I know that God exists, or how this or that, that's unrelated to their objection. You can
Yeah,
use the Bible itself to justify those claims. You don't have to show somehow that the text is reliable or anything else.
Mm.
All right, well, so for next time, I think we're going to do a different unrelated topic and then come back to this again. And I think I'll present, and maybe we'll go into a little more detail on some of this stuff. But for next time, we're going to do something we haven't done before. We're going to do a debate review. So the debate that I picked is between Peter Atkins, who's I think a scientist from Oxford or Cambridge, I can't remember. And he's an atheist. And then against John Lennox, who was a mathematician at the same school. So they were colleagues. And so everybody should watch that debate. I'll put it in the chat before the next meeting, and then we'll just kind of have a discussion on it. And just to sort of prep for that, the reason why I chose this debate is because the atheist Peter Atkins has a view known as scientism, which basically is this view that says science is the only way to know, something's true. And that is a very common view. Probably some of you, I'm sure all of us have heard people say that or kind of assume that. So I think it's good to go over that debate to sort of get into that a little bit and prepare you for those kind of objections. So yeah, watch that debate, and then we'll just, Rico and I will turn it over to you guys to kind of discuss. Yeah.
When is the next meeting then? Is it going to be every other week or?
Yeah, every other week. And I think we'll stick with Thursday if that works for everybody okay.
Yeah. I usually have this, mikä se nyt on, parillinen viikko. There would be another choir practice, and it would be right always at the same time with this.
Oh, okay.
So, but I don't know if then I would rather have if we have it on, mikä se on se bariton, uneven week number. Like now it's 36.
Okay. So you're saying in 2 weeks from now you have the choir.
Oh Lord.
Sorry?
So in 2 weeks from now you have choir practice.
Yeah, it's like it would have been today as well, but it's also every other week. But I have to see whether, if we want to keep it on this even weekly thing. So,
But couldn't we just have the next meeting in 3 weeks, and then after that every 2 weeks, or every other?
for example,
We could do that.
so
That doesn't.
so I have to also see, like, if I'm too busy that I can't even join the choir, but that would actually make it much easier for me. But I don't know if it has any difference to you which week.
Okay.
It would be good to join that choir as well, but I don't know. How do you feel
We'll
about
figure it out. We'll
it?
figure it out. I think we'll be able to meet in person next time, because Nam, he said he would get us a room at his university. So that should be good. Okay. Well, I think we're all good to go then. So yeah, I'll send the debate in the chat. Make sure you watch through it beforehand.
How long is it?
I think it's like an hour about. But even if you just watch the first half an hour, that's probably enough. Like, we don't need to go through all of it in one session. Yeah. Okay. Do you have anything else to add, Riku, before we cut things off?
Well, I don't know if does anyone have any comments about the approach itself or just anything? I mean, any feedback? Do you think it's something you could use or something that you don't want to use, or do you want to use some other approach?
I think it was easy to follow, and I really like that it was really Bible based.
Yeah, that was my intention. Thank you.
Yeah, and I also would say that, like, for the atheists, it's very easy to just zoom into this one place in the Bible and then critique it like very heavily.
Yeah,
And when you're not like accepting the biblical story in its full, it's like very hard to like, or it's easy to understand why they would like find it super hard to comprehend this some part of it. But when it's part of a bigger picture and you can see the like reason and the context in a fuller way, I then think it's good to know and understand that way.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's like a negative cherry picking. You pick the kind of the most worst things, and well, if you take any book like, I don't know, Lord of the Rings, I mean, if you just pick a sentence out of context, it could be just very weird. I mean, of course you have to understand what's going on. I think it's just obvious. I think the drawback could be that many people are not willing to listen, but then again, that could, if that's the case, kind of shows that they're not really interested in finding the truth behind the issue. They just think that they have found this great weapon they can use against Christianity.
Yeah, it's all about the like immense emotional response that you get when you read some passage of killing people, and like that is of course as well, like living here in a welfare state in Nordic country, everything is like very different from ancient times, and it's like very weird language in a way for us in itself, like that how it was then. But like the concept of like judgment and objective justice and stuff like that, we somehow take for granted, but then when it's applied in like a historical context right there, then it's terrifying to people.
Oh yeah. I mean, one aspect could be very well the atheist's own fear or understanding that he is condemned before God, and this is just a reminder. I don't know, maybe that's one psychological aspect of this, that he just wants to reject all that stuff.
All right, let's call it a night, and then we'll meet possibly in 2 or 3 weeks. I'll figure that out and get back to you soon.
Yeah.
Thanks, Riku, for the presentation.
Thank you.
Thanks, Rico.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, we're great.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Nice.
you.
Auf Wiedersehen.